Hello, friends. Welcome back to the While We're Waiting Hope After Child Loss podcast. I'm Jill Sullivan, your host and one of the co-founders of the While We're Waiting ministry. This is a podcast of stories of devastating loss and grief and heartbreak and struggle, and stories of hope and healing and faith and, yes, even joy. Underlying every conversation is the hope we have in Jesus Christ, which makes it possible to not just survive the loss of a child, but to live well while we're waiting to see them again in heaven one day. You can learn more about our ministry and the free bereaved parent retreats we host by visiting our website at www.whilewe'rewaiting.org. Welcome to episode number 276. When a father loses a child, the world changes in an instant. In this episode, we hear that story through the voice of a grieving dad, Terry Sternad. More than 40 years have passed since his 6-year-old son TJ went to heaven, but as Terry shares, the love and the loss are still deeply felt. In this first half of our conversation, Terry takes us back to the beginning of his faith journey. Before TJ's death in December of 1983, Terry didn't believe in God at all. But as he looks back now, he can see how God was quietly preparing his heart through the faithful witness of a coworker, tender conversations with his mother, and seeds of truth planted long before he knew how desperately he would need them. You'll get to know TJ, a bright, kind little boy with a big imagination, and you'll walk with Terry through the ordinary Saturday that suddenly became the worst day of his life. Yet even in that unbearable loss, Terry began to experience the presence of a God who met him right where he was. His story is one of pain, surrender, and transformation, a father's journey from disbelief to a living faith that has carried him through every day since. Hi, Terry. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Hi, Jill, and thanks for allowing me to be here. I'd love to tell the story of my son and how that's changed my life with God.
Yeah, and we are excited to hear about it. Before we start, let's give you an opportunity to tell the listeners just a little bit about yourself. Where are you from and what life is like for you there?
Okay, so I'm kind of from two places. We're snowbirds. We're both, my wife and I are originally from Ohio and still spend probably 6 months, 7 months a year here. The rest of the year we're in Cape Coral, Florida, trying to escape the cold and nasty winters up here. And we have churches both places. We have a good church in Ohio that we like. We have a great church in Florida that we love, and we're very pretty much involved in our churches. But so I've been married to Marcia, my wife, for 23 years now, and she is not the mother of the child that I lost. And she's a crafter, and she's active in card ministry. She probably makes 1,000 cards a year that she sends to some nursing homes in Florida and here in London, Ohio, where we live. Both churches will send her things for the people need cards. It might be a baptism. It might be they're on the prayer list. It might be different things. So that keeps her pretty busy. I do my grief share. We'll talk about later. We're both on prayer teams. We're both pretty involved in our churches, and that's the biggest part of our lives, really. Other than that, we love to travel. We've been blessed to go a lot of places. We're on a quest to see all the national parks in the country. And in 2 weeks, we're going to go see 3 more, and that'll have us at 57 done out of 63. So we're getting there, but we've got a great group of Christian friends. We play cards, we play games, we get together and just have a good time and just try to serve the Lord and be active in church and do our thing.
Amen. Sounds like a good life.
It is. It's got a lot of joy in it. We're pretty blessed.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So we're going to be talking a lot today about your son, TJ. He went to heaven over 40 years ago, and I want to get into his story in quite a bit of depth in a moment. But first, I want to get into a little bit of your story. You were not a believer before TJ died, and I would love for you to share a little bit about how God was working in your life before you ever even knew you were going to need him.
thanks for asking that question, because that's part of why I like to tell the story, because
Sure.
the verse, while we were yet sinners, God. So I had nothing to do with God. I had no interest, never went to church. We got dragged off when we were kids a little bit, but I really had no interest in God or anything about him. So probably the first big step in him preparing me for the day my son died was, we lived in Denver, Colorado at the time, and I worked downtown Denver, and there was a young man that worked for us that he was a draftsman. He didn't make a lot of money, but and he was married and had 3 kids, and they only had 1 car, so it was a real problem for him when he'd drive to work. So I just started giving him. He lived pretty close. I started giving him a ride to work, and I think yet today, these 41 years or 43 years later for him,
Yeah.
he was probably the most evangelical guy I ever met. So we spent a lot of our drives to work and back with him trying to win me over, get a notch in his belt for another person he brought to the Lord. And I
Yeah.
honestly wasn't super interested, but even in my pre-Christian days, at least I was polite. So
Sure. Well, and you were a captive audience, right?
I
You couldn't
was.
really get away.
I
Yeah.
was. So we had a lot of conversations, and I really learned a lot about plan of salvation, about eternal security, about prayer, about God's will, just all kinds of things. We probably rode together to work and back for a year, 2 years or something. And so I learned a lot. So it didn't change anything. I didn't believe any of it, but I had a lot of knowledge
Sure.
after that. The next step probably was, so we're in 1983 now, which is the year my son died, but this would be in May, towards the end of May. And we had a Irish Wolfhound at the time. I don't know if you know Irish Wolfhounds, but they're bigger than Great Danes often, and they're just wonderful
Yeah.
dogs. So, well, this dog got sick, and despite the fact that we probably shouldn't have spent as much money as we did, we spent a lot of money trying to save this dog, and it
Sure.
still didn't make it. And we're still am huge dog people, and so kind of like sometimes with couples after they lose a child, my wife and I couldn't talk to each other about it because we just make each other sad.
Yeah.
So I'd call my mom, and they had moved out to Colorado, and I'd talk to her about how sad I was. And it's interesting. Well, we always had a good relationship, like a lot of boys and their moms, I guess. We never really had a lot of intimate conversations or feelings kind of stuff, right? So those were probably some of the most intimate conversations I had with my mom as an adult at that point. I was 30 at that point. So the dog died maybe the 3rd week of May of 83. 2 weeks later, I get a call from my dad, and tells me there's something wrong with my mom. And, the squad's at their apartment, and I heard him ask the squad people if she was gone. And turned out she, with no history or reason to think so, she'd had a massive heart attack. And while they life flighted her to the hospital, she was really gone before she got there.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
so that was hard. And I guess after that happened, I wanted the things that my friend had told me to be true. I even went out and
Mhm.
bought a Bible and read it for a while, but I still wasn't there yet. And so after, I don't know, 2, 3 months probably, that all just kind of faded away. And I didn't think, much more about God or the Bible or anything at that point. But clearly, these are all steps he's bringing to give me knowledge about him and to start
Sure.
softening my heart. And well, I guess we're going to talk more about this later. But so that was June 7th, I believe, the day my mom died. December 3rd, then is when my son died. So we'll get to
Mhm.
that story, I guess, in a little bit here. But
Yeah.
but he had really prepared me for that day. And, when we talk about that day, I'll tell you about,
Mhm.
kind of how things transpired and
Yeah.
my first prayers ever.
Wow. Yeah. Yes. I'm anxious to get to that. But before we do, I would love to get to know your little boy a little bit. Terry Jr., right? TJ. Take a few minutes and tell us about him. Help us get to know him a little bit.
Oh, he was a boy, almost 6 years old. This happened 10 days before his birthday that he died.
Mm,
But he was a sweet, caring little kid, and just a really good kid. I mean, some of my best memories of him were we had a couple down the street from us, and we were godparents to their youngest daughter, their second youngest daughter. So TJ would have been 5 at this time, and she was probably 3 at this time. So we lived in Denver, and we'd go into the mountains a lot. So we were in the mountains one day hiking, not serious hiking, with all the kids and stuff. And we're kind of walking along a ridge kind of thing, and look back, and there's TJ with our goddaughter, who's 2 years younger than he is. She's kind of back there by herself, and he's just kind of watching over and making sure she was okay and stuff. And that kind of describes him a little bit.
sure.
He loved Star Wars. This was about the time the Star Wars came out, and
Yeah.
he had all kinds of stuff, Star Wars stuff. And I didn't know this until actually after he died, and talking to the neighbors across the street. One day he took all the Star Wars stuff and he set it up on their porch in front of their front door and rang the doorbell. He wanted to show it to Jim, was the man's name. And
Yeah.
and his wife answered and said, "Oh, Jim's not here." And he just, "Okay, I'll bring it back some other time." And he just packed it all up and left. So he was a good kid. He actually, even the morning that he died, before we left home, he was working on a model airplane, and kind of the two of us were working on it. And we needed another rubber band. We ran out of rubber bands to hold the places that were glued. And he said to me, "Well, just cut the rubber band in half." I said, "TJ, yeah, if we cut it in half, it's not going to work very well."
Right.
And he goes, "No, cut it lengthwise around, so then we'll have 2 rubber bands." Just so
Wow.
he was a great kid. He really was.
Yeah. Sounds like a little guy with a big personality.
He did. He and my daughter, that was 2 years older, both of them, even at 5 years old, he could carry on a conversation with most adults pretty well. He wasn't shy of adults. Both my kids were like that. They could both talk pretty well, to adults. So
Yeah.
it was great.
That is great. So talk about what happened on that day in December of 1983.
So it's December 3rd. His birthday would have been December 13th, and he would have been 6. So just 10 days before his birthday. So our Saturday morning routine was we'd go to a writing lesson for my daughter. We started that on her 5th birthday, so this is 3 years into that. Pretty much, unless something else was going on, pretty much every Saturday we'd go to her writing lesson. So this was not an unusual day. My in-laws happened to be staying with us for a while, so they went with us on this day. And it actually had snowed quite a bit and was pretty cold that day. So we got there, and normally our writing lessons were outside, but this day they were inside the barn because it was too much snow and too cold outside. So our usual practice, we'd watch the writing lesson, and he'd watch it some, and he'd play around the barn some. There are a lot of things for a 6-year-old kid to get into around the barn. So we watched a writing lesson for the day. This particular day, when the writing lesson was over, we were buying a new saddle. So it took a few extra minutes to get the new saddle. So then we went to get TJ because we were going to take a picture of both kids on the horse for our Christmas card for that year, right? And he didn't initially come when we called him, and you're not too worried about it. Like I said, we've been doing this for 3 years. He's a lot of places around the stable that he could be. So we started looking a little bit and calling him. The exact time frame's hard to remember, but probably, maybe at 10 minutes, we still haven't found him. Now you're starting to get a little worried. So we got other people around the stables to help us start looking for him. And so we're concentrating mainly in front of the stables because that's where the big road is, and we were concerned that he would have got out to the busy road. So
Sure.
I don't know how long we're into it now, probably 20 minutes, 30 minutes maybe. We still haven't found him. So now it's getting pretty much panic.
Yeah.
We called the sheriff, and he came out and started helping us look. So while everybody else was mostly looking in front of the stables, there was a creek that came kind of down one side and behind this stable, and then kind of up the other side, and nobody was looking there. So I started looking there, and say it was pretty cold, but this creek was mostly about 2 feet deep. And there was ice coming out from the edges a little bit. And we still hadn't even found footprints any place, but I thought maybe he got in there and is trapped under the ice. So I got in and tried to look under the ice and didn't see anything. And I kept going down the creek, and finally I found some footprints. This creek had a bridge that crossed it, and at that place the water was deeper, maybe 6 or 8 feet deep. And the footprints, and it was kind of pooled there, so there was a thin layer of ice over it there. And so I followed the footprints. They went down to where that was, and the ice was broken through. So I assumed that he was in there. But by now, I think we must have been looking for him for 45 minutes by that time. So I went and got the sheriff. The sheriff called. They have a cold water diving team. So they called them. Didn't take them too long, but a little while to get there. And they went in and found him.
Mm.
So they got him out. By this time, there's a house at the stables, and my wife was with her parents and some other people in the house. So they wrapped him in a sleeping bag and took him to the hospital, and I followed in a sheriff's car. So they said that even if it's been a long time in really, really cold water, people can survive for a long time, which I had no idea at the time that anybody could have survived as long as we thought he was in there. So they took him to the hospital, and they took him back, and they put him on a heart and lung machine because that's the fastest way you can warm somebody up. And I'm in the waiting room by myself. And so did a couple things. I called my friend that I'd given the ride to work and asked him to pray. And actually, he prayed for me, not for my son.
Yeah,
but
I love that.
But I also prayed, and from my conversations with him, I knew enough to pray that God's will would be done for my son, because I didn't want him to be alive, but be a vegetable or be severely diminished, or if I just didn't know what. So after a while, they came out and told me that I might as well go back to where my wife was because it was going to take some time to do this, and they couldn't tell if he was alive or not until his temperature got high enough. Sure. So I went back there, and we're waiting back there, and we got a call from the hospital, and they said they got a heartbeat back for about 45 minutes. And so we're all getting ready to go down to the hospital, and obviously excited, scared, because they told us it was still a long shot that he could survive. Before we left for the hospital then, which was only a few minutes, they called back and said his heart had given out. It just had too much damage. So we went home without our son. And in those first days, we had a lot of people staying at the house, and on 2 separate occasions, there were a bunch of people downstairs, and I just, feeling overwhelmed, went upstairs to our bedroom. Both times I just cried out, just God help me.
Yeah.
That's still, this many years later, I remember that so well, because both times I did that, he touched me. It wasn't like it was all better, but I could handle it at the moment. And that's still kind of a bedrock of my faith, knowing that at that point he just really reached out to me. So So I think maybe some of the rest of this might be some of your later questions, but moving on, and, getting into a church and that kind of thing
Hmm.
was what
Yeah.
happened after that. But that was the day that changed my life, and a little bit of what we'll talk about in a little while, maybe. But many years later, I tell people that it was clearly the worst day of my life. Nothing's
Mm.
ever been that bad. But I also tell people it was the best day of my life because that's the day
Yeah,
I accepted Christ.
that's right.
He has been with me ever since. It's been a journey. I didn't become like perfect overnight or anything,
No, no, none of us do.
or
Right.
or yet.
Yeah.
But it was the day that changed my life for the better. So
Yeah. One, I love your story because of how God was working in your life, planting those seeds all along. And then the day that you really needed him, he was there and you knew where to turn. I love the faithfulness of that young man that rode with you in the car every day, that just, invested in you and talked to you. And so you knew right where to go on that worst day of your life. I also love, as you're sharing your story, that there's emotion there, even after
there it is.
40 plus years.
Yeah,
And I think that might be reassuring to some of our listeners who wonder, am I ever going to, is there going to come a day years and years from now that I might forget my child or that I won't miss them anymore? And I think just listening to you is assurance that no, we are never going to forget our children, that loss is always going to be there.
it is. And we talk about that a lot of Grief Share. But what I tell people, because these 41 years later, and for many years since, I don't get sad very often. When I tell the
Right.
story, it gets a little emotional telling the story.
Sure.
But it's not very often that I get sad. Mostly I look on back with happiness and what a great kid he was and
Yeah.
that kind of thing. But there are still, aside from telling the story, there are still some times when when those emotions still well up. But actually, when that happens, I'm grateful for it because that's the time that I feel closest to him.
Yeah. Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
so so it's okay when I get sad.
Absolutely.
So yeah, for the people that'll be listening to this, with God's help, you'll get to a point
Mhm.
where you have a lot of joy in your life, and where the sadness is not there very often. But it won't ever go away totally because our children are a part of us, whether they were a miscarriage at 3 months or at 6 years or at 50 years, and they're gone.
That's
They're a
right.
part of us.
That's right. Yeah. Thank you for that. I think that's going to be an encouragement to a lot of people. So, our stories are very different in the journey that we walked out with my daughter. She had cancer for a year. And so, walked that journey with her, had some preparation. We prayed and we believed and we knew that God could heal her and that he chose to heal her in heaven. With your situation, it was just a normal day. This was something you guys did often, going to the barn and doing the writing lessons. And so it was just a normal day. And then things turned so drastically. Talk about that experience of having just a normal day turn into your worst nightmare.
I think the word that describes it best is a shock. I mean, you
Yeah.
just can't believe it. We were getting the kids ready for a picture. 45 minutes later or so, they were pulling him out of the creek, and you can't process it. I mean, you're just overwhelmed. And it's, you go home without your son. How can that happen? How can that
Yeah.
possibly be? What are we going to do? How are we going to go on? All those things, which I'm sure you experience aspects of that as well.
Mhm.
A different thing. But when I read your question, what kind of a side story that I think describes it well in a sense is we had some friends that had two daughters with cystic fibrosis,
Mm.
and
Mhm.
at the time it's still not a long life for kids, but it was shorter back then. And
Yes. Mhm.
so first one died. We went to the funeral. The second one, they were 3-4 years apart. The second one got a lung transplant, and they thought it was going to be okay, but then there was some kind of infection in the lungs that they got, and
Mm-hmm.
didn't work, and she died as well. And then talking with those parents, we said to them, we can't imagine how hard that would be to see your child get sick and with cystic fibrosis, their lungs filled with water, and they're constantly going to the hospital. And to
Yeah.
watch that happen, we just can't imagine how awful that would be to see that. And their response to us was, "Yeah, but we had time. We knew it was coming. We could say goodbye. We can't imagine how awful it would be to go through what you went through." And I think the answer to that is it's awful no matter what. It's just different.
That's right. That's right. Mm-hmm.
One's not better than the other. They're just,
Mm-hmm.
it's awful to lose a child. I'm sure you've had people say to you, "I can't imagine what it's like to lose a child," right?
Right.
My response is always, you're right. You can't imagine. It is much worse than you could ever think it would be. But how you lose it, I think it impacts your grief journey, not in the sense of more pain or harder, just different. Different, because you probably processed some of your grief before your daughter actually passed, right?
Right, we did.
Sudden deaths don't get to do that. So it changes the nature of the journey, I think, a little bit, but it doesn't change the pain. That's one's not worse. They're just different.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I feel the same way. So how did your newly found faith in God help you survive those early days after TJ went to heaven?
So, yeah, newly found is kind of the key word there, right? So,
yeah.
So my wife couldn't go to church. I wanted to start going to church. She couldn't go for a while. So I went to a church that actually my friend that I gave the car rides to suggested. And it was I think this was another God thing. It was a very small church, 35 people maybe. And there was a couple there that had lost a 3-year-old daughter, I believe, to meningitis. And she was a nurse. But one of those meningitis cases where from the time they figured out what it was, within 2 hours, her daughter was gone, kind of thing. Wow. But it was perfect for us to bond with that couple. The church was great because you got to know everybody quickly. The pastor did a Bible study just for my wife and I at his home, and kind of the nature, the way I am. So I just threw myself into learning about God, reading the Bible, going through Genesis. I chart out all the lineages and who was what, and I think it was being in this very caring small church with this other couple that had lost a child, and just learning, because I told you I learned a lot from my friend. Didn't begin to skim the depths of what's in the Bible. So I think it was that getting to know God. And I didn't have any preconceived notions like some people do when they lose a child or whatever. So, my belief system said that, the Bible's it. It's true. And if anything, isn't biblical, then it's wrong. And so I approached it that way. And 2 things I still remember from those very early days about my relationship with God was, a lot of people do, but a lot of people don't immediately embrace Romans 8:28, right? All things work together for good. It's hard for a lot of people that have just lost a child to believe that one, but I believe that immediately. I think, kind of, again, being brand new to it is kind of the God said it, I believe it thing.
Right.
So that kind of helped a lot. But that's what really sustained me through it, was getting to know God in that case, and him placing us in exactly the right church for us and people there. All kind of sustained us through that time. Didn't mean it, as you know, didn't mean it wasn't hard. Didn't mean I sat in my office after I went back to work and, fought off the tears at work.
Of course.
That kind of thing. But again, for the people that are really in the depths of it right now, one of the things they say in grief sharing a lot of people have heard, but time doesn't heal. Time doesn't really help you. It dampens it a little bit, but it's time with God that heals.
That's right.
So it's hard for me to remember some of the time frames, but within a year, things were quite a bit better. Within 2 or 3 years, they were a lot better. Still, not great, but probably by 5 years, it didn't dominate our lives anymore.
Right.
Still was pretty prevalent, but didn't dominate our lives. And then, sometime after that, and again, how many years I can't tell you, but it got to a point where it was an occasional thought, not a everyday thing. So again, with God's help, it does get better, and He works on you. He gives you things to do, like you're doing, like I do with Grief Share, and different things that we do, and it brings joy into your life. So one of the big sayings out of Grief Share and other grief sources as well is that pain and peace and joy can all coexist.
That's right.
And they do.
Yes.
So, but that's all only possible with God.
That's right. That's right. I love what you said about at 5 years, it didn't feel like it dominated you anymore.
Yeah.
Because, boy, for those first few years, it's your first thought when you wake up. It's your last thought when you go to sleep. It's just there constantly. But so gradually over time, and the length of time is different for everyone,
Right.
you one day realize, oh, this is not dominating everything in my life anymore. And that certainly mirrors my experience. So I think that's helpful. I'm glad you shared it that way. I hadn't thought about using the word dominate to describe those early years and then the shift when you get to the point where it doesn't dominate your every moment. As we close out this first half of my conversation with Terry Sternad, I'm struck by how clearly you can see God's hand woven through his story. From those early car rides with a faithful coworker to the way he met Terry in his deepest pain. We've gotten to know TJ, a bright little boy full of curiosity and compassion, and we've heard how God used unimaginable loss to draw Terry to himself. In next week's episode, we'll pick up the conversation as Terry reflects on what he's learned in the 40-plus years since TJ went to heaven, how grief and faith have continued to shape him, what the church can do better in caring for hurting people, and how serving others through Grief Share has brought deep healing and joy. It's an encouraging, hope-filled continuation of this powerful story, and I hope you'll join us next Wednesday for the rest of our conversation.